Evening, everyone. It's great to see such a fabulous turnout tonight. So Trobe University acknowledges the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as traditional owners of the land on which we meet this evening, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. My name is Keith Nugent. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research at Trobe University, and on behalf of the university it's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth event for the Bold Thinking Series 2017, Food, Mood and Diet, Myth versus Science. Tonight, our panel of experts will consider the health benefits of the Mediterranean diet and how the food we eat affects our appetite and our mood. The Mediterranean diet, rich in plant foods, olive oil, fish and seafood, is one of the most respected, well-researched and often prescribed diets in the world, with positive health benefits that have been scientifically tested and proven for over 60 years. This presentation will examine the scientific research related to nutrition, depression and anxiety, and the protection that the diet provides against health conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, cancer and dementia. The panellists will also discuss and debate the controversy over the latest fad diets and their purported health benefits, explain how the Mediterranean diet in particular can help us all lead longer and healthier lives, as well as consider the causal links between food and mood, altogether something which is clearly of great interest to all of us. On tonight's panel, we're very fortunate to have Professor Catherine Itsiopoulos, who's the head of the School of Allied Health at Trobe University, where she leads 11 allied health disciplines. Catherine is a recognised leader in dietetics and has international standing as a leader in Mediterranean diet research. She's an accredited practicing dietitian, deputy chair of the Australian Dietetics Council, and is the founding head of the Department of Dietetics and Human Nutrition at La Trobe University. So, Catherine, if you'll make your
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you, Keith.
So Catherine's specific area of interest is Mediterranean diet studies, and she's authored over 60 peer-reviewed publications, as well as published 2 Mediterranean diet cookbooks, which I recommend to you, the Mediterranean Diet 2013 and the Mediterranean Diet Cookbook 2015. We also have Dr. Antigone Kouris from La Trobe University, who's an Associate Professor, School of Allied Health in the Department of Rehabilitation, Nutrition and Sport. She is an accredited practicing dietitian with over 30 years' experience. She was the first researcher to show that in 1995 that adherence to the Mediterranean diet pattern in old age reduces mortality. Her research team was also the first to develop a validated Mediterranean diet score, which is now used by many other researchers around the world working in this area. So Antigone, please welcome. So joining Catherine and Antigone are Shane Delia and Norman Swan. Shane Delia is best known as chef and owner of Maha restaurant and Biggie Smalls. Shane is a television presenter on Channel 9 Postcards, host of his own TV show Shane Delia's Spice Adventure, author of Maha Middle Eastern Home Cooking and Spice Journey, Adventures in Middle Eastern Cooking, and an ambassador for Mercedes-Benz Australia, Western Bulldogs Football Club and Melbourne City Football Club. Shane is based in Melbourne, Australia. His wife, Maha, is the inspiration and namesake of the flagship restaurant. Together they have 2 children, daughter Jada and son Jude. So welcome, Shane. Dr. Norman Swan hosts the Health Report on ABC's Radio National and Tonic on ABC News 24. The Health Report is the world's longest-running health program in the English-speaking world, and Norman has won many awards for his work, including Australia's top prize for journalism, the Gold Walkley. He is only the 3rd person to be awarded the prestigious Medal of the Australian Academy of Science and was given an honorary MD by the University of Sydney on its 150th anniversary. Norman trained in medicine in Scotland and paediatrics in London and Sydney before joining the ABC, and has hosted many other programs on radio and television. So welcome, Norman. So I will now hand over to tonight's host, acclaimed broadcaster, journalist and writer Francis Leach, and the panel. So please join me once again in welcoming all of them.
Thank you, Keith.
And thank you for coming along to tonight's latest edition of the Bold Thinking series. And we hope that we've made you hungry, because I think there will be some food of a Mediterranean nature afterwards as well, which is great. I want to start with you, Antigone, and just to talk about the fact that diet and good health have always been inextricably linked. We were talking a little bit on stage before about when I was growing up, and the Pritikin diet was the thing. And then there's been numerous diets throughout beyond that which have always promised good health and long living. So why is the Mediterranean diet any different to those?
I think the Mediterranean diet has a lot of evidence behind it. It's really 30 years of evidence. So you can't beat that. I mean, the paleo diet doesn't have that much, hardly any evidence behind it. So from that point of view, I would say that that's why I would be promoting the Mediterranean diet to my patients especially, and to the public for that reason, because of the amount of evidence that supports the diet.
I'm going to ask you about the evidence in a moment, Catherine. I guess we need to define our terms and tell people, you know, if we are talking about the med diet, what is it? I mean, what does it consist of, and what are the elements that make it so appealing as a blueprint for good living, I guess?
Sure. I guess primarily it's a plant-based diet with a ratio of plant to animal foods of 4:1. So when you look at your plate, instead of being 50-50, which tends to be a lot of our plates, half animal foods, half plant foods, 4/5 are plant foods and 1/5 is animal food. The plants, let's start with the fats. I guess the fats are very important because in a Mediterranean diet, extra virgin olive oil is the primary fat used in all of the different ways you would use fat in cooking and salads. So extra virgin olive oil is important. And then we start with the vegetable content, 1/2 kilo a day, leafy greens, tomatoes, onion, garlic, herbs and spices, legumes as a key protein source in the diet, fish a few times a week for high omega-3s, nuts as a snack, again high in antioxidants, polyphenols, yogurt, fermented, great for the bowel, as a key dairy food, obviously cheese as well, some cheese. And smaller quantities of whole grains and sourdough bread in particular, and that depends on how hard you work. So if you're a heavy labourer, you can eat more of the whole grain breads, but if your energy expenditure is a bit lower, we cut down the bread a little bit. So that encapsulates a Mediterranean diet, and it's rich in anti-inflammatory components. So plant-derived bioactives, but also animal-derived bioactives like fish, where we get the omega-3 fatty acids. And so lots of nutrients, but most importantly, when you combine all of those things, it's the taste. That we have palatable cuisine ingredients that we find in all of our studies over the last 30 years that most people enjoy the diet. That's why they stick to it.
So that's the difference between the Pritikin diet, which is hard work and tastes rubbish. It's probably why you can't stay with it. Okay, just on the value of the diet, how do we measure it? Because you've come up with the world-famous measurement which tells people, I guess, you know, the health benefits of a Mediterranean diet. So what are the increments and what do we measure it against?
Well, we developed a score back in the 1990s with our colleagues in Greece, Professor Antonia Itsiopoulos and her husband Dimitri. And the score was based on the food habits of Cretan men who had very low rates of heart disease in the 1960s. And this was the famous 7-country study that Dr. Ansel Keys instigated, trying to find out why American men had such high rates of heart disease, and the Cretan men had the lowest rates. So we modelled our score on the food habits of these Cretan men, which was primarily a plant-based diet. They actually ate very little meat and very little dairy. It was mainly legumes and grains and fruit and veggies, lots of olive oil. So our score basically mimicked that food pattern from the 1960s. And so the score consisted of 9 food groups. So you have your fruits, your vegetables, your grains, your legumes, a high intake of monounsaturated fat and low saturated fat, mainly coming from olive oil. It was low in dairy and meat, moderate in fish, and moderate in alcohol. So that's our score. And the higher the score, the better it was. So you were adhering to a more Mediterranean dietary pattern if you had a higher score. So we used this score and applied it to 800 elderly people. This was when I was at Monash and I was doing my PhD at the time, and it was an international study. It was called the Food Habits in Later Life Study. And when we applied this score not only to our Greek elderly that were in the study, but also we applied it to Swedes and Anglo-Celts and Japanese. It didn't seem to matter what the cuisine was, as long as they followed the food pattern, which was a food pattern that was high in plant food and low in animal food, they had a mortality advantage. They actually,
when you say that mortality advantage, what are we talking about? So they were living longer to what extent?
by a big extent. So after 5 years of follow-up, there was a 50% reduced risk of death if you followed this Mediterranean dietary pattern.
I just want to ask Shane, do you reckon you could take a restaurant and say, if you eat here regularly, we can give you an extra 5 or 10 years life? Do you reckon you've got a marketing pitch there?
Maybe we sign them up, get their data so we can talk. I know we have to make. For us, it's about how we can communicate with people. If the message is that they're going to live longer, I don't know if that's going to be a selling tool for enough people. I don't think people are really, we see in the restaurants, as much as we try to advertise that the food's healthy and it's good, and we're telling you where it's from, it's not the message that keeps people coming back.
What is the message that keeps people coming back?
An experience.
Yeah.
People are after an experience. People want experiential products. People want experiential journeys. They want things they can remember, something that was different from last time. So we try to do that with the way we flavour food. But if the message that we're selling is this is really good for you, I mean, I don't know if I don't know if we're going to be as busy as what we are. So yeah, I don't know.
But that's the conundrum, isn't it? And Norman, we know from what Catherine and Antigone's research has told us, and no doubt you've done countless programs on this as well, that things that are good for us are not necessarily the things that we want or that we're going. If we all knew that the Mediterranean diet was going to give us this outcome, we'd all be eating it. So why do you think we're not?
Well, I think a lot of people are increasingly. And the interesting thing, and perhaps Catherine and Antigone will disagree, but my understanding here is that we get overly obsessed with individual nutrients.
Okay.
How many of you are on a gluten-free diet? Go on, be honest. You're not being honest. Guarantee that there's more than that in the audience. But I mean, so I'm not going to take gluten. I'm going to worry about my carbs. I've got, my blood group's A positive, so I've got to eat according to this and so on. The beauty of the Mediterranean diet is that it's not just about plant versus meat versus it's about the cuisine. It's actually about how you cook. It's so the recipes that you use. It's the fact, there probably is a little bit to do with eating more at lunchtime than the evening. People who are fat or obese tend to eat most of their calories after dark. The Mediterranean style is you eat more at lunchtime. Karen O'Day here in Melbourne has shown that if you take red pepper, sprinkle extra virgin olive oil, grill it, that releases far more potent antioxidants than anything that you can buy over the shelf. You tend to eat more slowly because you're eating with the family. There's a whole lot of things that go along with this. And the difference translates to about 6 years, I think. So if you actually take people who most closely adhere to that food pattern, to those who eat the hamburgers and chips, it's 6 years of life expectancy that you gain. And it's not such a terrible diet. Since when is eating, a tasty dish of moussaka or something like that going to be, is a miserable experience? What's a miserable experience is the Scarsdale diet or the Pritikin diet. And just remember, Scarsdale was murdered by his partner.
Yeah, but
there's a reason for that.
For somebody who's time poor, and you should be eating better throughout the day, I'd much prefer to eat a greasy, dodgy burger that tastes really good than a really bad salad. Or something like, because we try to serve, we're all time poor, we're all busy, we're all running around, and food, you think convenience, we've got brands that, Maha, we try to serve great, nutritionist food, but we're also talking about stuff that we do with Biggie Smalls, which is tasty, but it's not balanced from a nutrition point,
So you wouldn't eat it all the time?
No, but I'd much prefer to eat a kebab that I know is mega tasty than a really bad salad that's just been slapped together for somebody who's time poor to get out. So it's hard, I think. It's hard,
You don't get bad salads in the Greek cuisine. They're all good salads.
Well, if you prepare it yourself, but
that's the challenge, isn't it? And we might talk about that a little later on about, access to good food and food choices is an exercise in wealth or in being wealthy and having options, being affluent, and that's not something that everyone can do. But I know you, Norman, talked about the nutrients, and we will discuss, I think, the cuisine aspect of it. But I do want to know, are there, in your research, specific nutrients that are undeniably, through the Mediterranean diet, rock solid good for you, that do have a really massive impact on your well-being?
I suppose the beauty of what we did was our score focused on food.
Yep.
And I think that's what sets it apart, because at the time when we developed the score, nutrition scientists were obsessed with nutrients.
Yes.
And you know, what we eat is beyond the nutrients. It's about the food matrix. It's about everything that's
So
in
the food matrix, what do you mean by that?
The structure of food. So the more we pulverise it and break it down into powders and liquids, you lose the structure of the food, and the structure is important for lowering the glycemic index of your diet. So if you lose the structure, you lose quite a lot. So that's why when we say unprocessed food, whole food is so important. So back to your question about nutrients, I don't want to be reductionist like that, but I would have to say that it's the prebiotics in the Greek diet or the Mediterranean diet that is so wonderful, because it promotes the growth of the good bacteria. And everyone's probably heard about the microbiome and how important that is for health. And I think the Mediterranean diet, that's where it's got an edge over other diets. It's particularly good for the gut. And it's,
Yeah, that's fascinating, because we talked a little about this in preparation for tonight. I didn't realise, Catherine, that what Antigone has been talking about, the connection between the gut and well-being, and not just physical well-being, mental well-being. The microbiome, tell people about that and what the research is saying about how that might be crucial to an overall well-being for people.
And it's I guess a relatively new phenomenon, not that it's existed obviously through the ages, but we're now able to measure the microbiome using various techniques, which means we can actually identify the different bacterial colonies that inhabit our bowel, and there are more bacterial cells and DNA than we have in our own bodies, and it is our largest organ. It's considered an organ because the bacteria that colonise our bowels are metabolically active. Now, they're not all beneficial. We have dysbiotic bacteria, which seem to be amplified with poor diets. So when we have highly processed diets that are high in certain fats, highly processed fats again, because it's not just about the fat, it's the way it's processed as well, and the matrix of the food that you consume it, as well as all of the other insults on our bodies, we tend to get an increase in dysbiotic bacteria and a reduction in the bacteria that's protective. But what we know from emerging studies is that diets like a Mediterranean diet that contain probiotics, which are the fermented foods and yogurts and live cultures, or prebiotics, which are often carbohydrate foods that are resistant to digestion. They end up in our bowel, the bacteria eat these carbohydrates and they thrive. And they produce short-chain fatty acids, which are very important chemicals that we absorb into our body, and they can affect our brain function. They can actually reduce inflammation in the brain, make us feel better, but it is emerging science, and we need to do a lot more research about the gut-brain axis and the impact of foods on improving the composition of our microbiome to maximise our metabolic health.
So research at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, has shown that they've found specific bacteria, bacilli, that actually have an antidepressant effect. And there are bacteria which also are inefficient at recycling energy. So one of the things that the microbiome did when we were hunter-gatherers was recycle energy and nutrients back into the body. Well, actually, you don't want that in today's world. You actually want to be able to
Get rid of
poo it
extra.
out and so have an inefficient microbiome. And there's some evidence that the sort of bacteria you get in a Mediterranean diet are inefficient in terms of recycling energy, which means that you're actually not absorbing as many calories from your diet or reabsorbing as before.
I mean, there was a study, done in Italy just last year by De Filippis and colleagues, and what they found, they studied 120 Italians, and they had vegetarians, vegans and omnivores. And the Italians who were following a more Mediterranean dietary pattern, no matter what, if they were vegan, vegetarian or omnivore, as long as they were having a more plant-based diet, they had more of the good bacteria in their bowel. So they had more lactobacilli, more bifido, more prevotella, and they also had more such short-chain fatty acids in their stools. So they actually measured their stools and looked at what was coming out the other end, and they had more of these beneficial fatty acids. So there is data coming out now on the Mediterranean diet, and being a study that was done in Italy, they were actually also looking at the cuisine, because all the Italians were eating according to the Mediterranean cuisine. So I think that's a really important study that shows the Mediterranean diet is actually good for the gut.
And the gut, therefore, is good for mental health, at least we're believing.
Mental health,
Well,
yes.
and your immune system, it trains your immune system and
Yes.
keeps your immune system in check. We've got about 1 trillion cells in our body. 99.9% of the DNA in our body is not ours. It's these bugs, and they're critical to health and well-being.
So, Catherine, how do we then expand on our knowledge of that to maximise the opportunities it presents if we are understanding the microbiome has that incredibly powerful influence on us?
Well, we need to do a lot more studies, and a lot of the clinical trials we do now, we collect stool samples, so that might be a little bit
You have
uncomfortable
all the fun,
to do.
don't you?
It's lots of fun, but you only need a very small sample, and we've got clever techniques for collecting. So what we... Just an earbud.
It's lucky you're eating after this, not before.
That's right, before, not
Because it's
after.
going to get worse.
So what we do is we collect the stools pre and post a dietary intervention, and we can then examine the different colonies. But we also have to measure what's in the blood, because one other effect that we haven't talked about in terms of the microbiome is that the healthy bacteria are important for the integrity of the lining of the bowel. So they keep the junction of the cells tight. And when we have more dysbiotic bacteria, unfriendly bacteria, they tend to break away, and toxins from the bowel and the waste products tend to enter into our bloodstream, and we can develop endotoxemia. That sounds quite alarmist, but some of these toxins will go straight to the brain and affect us metabolically. So it's important for the tightness of these cells, and we can measure that using various techniques to know whether we have a leaky gut or not, or a permeable gut.
Just think about that, Shane, next time you have your kebab at lunchtime.
My wife tells me I've got a leaky gut all the time.
But I'm wondering, could we get to a point where we could map someone's gut health and then work out exactly what diet would be best for them? Is that a possibility, Norman and Antigone, that we could get to a point where you could work out exactly what your gut health looks like and then almost prescribe a diet, it being a Mediterranean diet, given the benefits you've talked about, to assist or to
I'll let Antigone go first. I've got a view on that.
I mean, I think that's where we're heading. I don't know how soon that is. It might be 5 or 10 years away, but definitely that's the way we're heading for it's called personalised nutrition, where you'll be prescribed a diet based on your biochemistry and probably your stool output as well. So, yeah.
So I disagree with that. I think that personalised stuff has been overhyped.
Yep.
I think that you can generalise. I mean, Antigone's research, Catherine's research, and others has shown, that you get this life expectancy advantage from a generalised diet. So it helps everybody. It's got you can assume that it's got a population effect, and I think that what you might find that's going to happen is about weight loss, for example. So you've got these awful people who can eat anything they like and stay thin. Unlike me and perhaps some of you who you just have to look at a croissant and you put on weight.
I hear you.
Yeah. And so there's 2 reasons for that. One is probably you've got more brown fat, the fat that burns calories, and that's another story, not for today. But the other is you might have a thin microbiome. So you've got a microbiome that's inefficient and gets rid of calories more effectively. And so what may start to happen is that they find from the study of the microbiome the bugs in your bowel that are thin bugs, and therefore they may capsulize those and you start taking them. At the moment, really what you've got to do is, and there have been animal experiments, maybe some humans, but I'll be corrected by Antigone and Catherine know far more than me, is where you have fecal transplants from thin to fat, and it works in animals.
What happens there? Come on. Explain that to me, please.
So, do you really want me to explain that?
You can't just drop that phrase into this conversation.
I was
So
hungry
fecal
as
transplant
well,
is literally what it is that you take somebody's feces,
Yep.
you mush it up, and you then ingest it.
From a healthy person, though.
From a healthy person.
Yes.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. They can't have hepatitis B or that sort of thing, or HIV or what have you. So
Looking forward to dinner now.
and it's often given by nasogastric, you don't eat it, you get nasogastric tube and so on. But that's it's proven to be effective in antibiotic-induced diarrhea. But there is animal evidence to suggest that actually, if you give a fat mouse a thin mouse's microbiome, it goes thinner, and vice versa. And I'm not sure of the evidence in humans. But that's the sort of thing that might happen. Or you've got a pattern of illness in your family that's discovered by your genes, where adjusting your diet might reduce your chances of that illness. But I'm not sure. There's a lot of people out there, getting their DNA tested by naturopaths. Naturopaths are reading the DNA, coming up with completely bullshit prescriptions for your diet. Completely bullshit, let me tell you, because there's no evidence behind this yet. And they'll argue till blue in the face. No doubt I've sparked a few annoyed people already. Or they're reading the blood type group and eating towards the blood types. There is something to all that, but it's too early to be able to say.
We're the ones that have to deal with it when you come to the restaurant. And we get this list. Have you got any dietary restrictions or allergies? Oh, yeah, I'm fructose, gluten, I can't eat any tomatoes, nothing starting with the letter P. And, it's ridiculous.
Well, just on that, and I'm fascinated by this part of the conversation, and I want to ask you, Shane, has diet and what people eat now become part of their identity? Rather than being functional, I can't eat that because I'll break out in hives. It's now, I am lactose intolerant. That's what I am. And it's become a function of who they are. So they've got something to talk about. I'm lactose intolerant. It's become, what we eat and what we don't eat is now it's almost like identity politics. This is what I do.
I think that there's extremists on every side. I've got a good friend of mine who's vegan, and we had a great relationship, and she was quite moderate with her opinion in the early days, and recently has become quite an activist and really pushed against everything that I do. It's become a bit of an issue. It's almost like I'm going to agree with her or I'm not. I'm like, I agree with you. We should treat animals better. We shouldn't be eating them just for the sake of it. I think farming should be a lot more laws around it. I agree with everything that you say, but I'm still going to have it as a part of my diet. And it's become a really big issue between her and I. As far as an identity goes, I don't know. I know that it's within the restaurants, we've had to adapt and adopt that there's people that are different from me, different from us. That we don't have, I remember when I first started cooking, you wouldn't have a vegetarian menu, you'd have a dish and it would be risotto. Vegetarian, just take off the meat. Still have the meat sauce, just take off the meat. That was what it was. But now we at Maha, we've really embraced it at Maha. It's at least 10 to 15% of our market is vegan or vegetarian. That's a huge chunk of our restaurant trade. And we've prided ourselves on producing a strictly vegan menu. Because we think if we're going to produce a menu, we'll produce a vegan menu, and then if we want people who want to adapt on that to become vegetarian, whatever we can. But if we start from I don't want to say derogatory, a lower base with more restrictions, and then we can amplify based on their requirements. But it gives us a challenge too. As cooks, if you're just dealing with a vegan base, it gives us a lot of challenges.
Discovering as well as you go along.
Yeah, it's been good for me, especially through my travels, with Spice Journey. You start to see a lot of cuisines that are strictly plant or legume based. And you can bring those learnings back, and it's about spice and balance of flavour, and taking the best and the sweet aspects of natural products and amplifying them with natural ingredients.
Can I just follow up with a question about cuisine and culture? So, Kevin, was it 1 to 4?
4 to 1.
4 to 1.
Plant to animal food ratio.
Do you think that generally Australia's cuisine culture and dining culture would allow for a successful restaurant to go at a 1 to 4 ratio, plant and legumes to?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's up. I think there has been more emphasis put on the restaurants as well. We take it as a responsibility when we're designing meals to give a bit more of a balanced meal. We don't have an a la carte restaurant. I think in a traditional restaurant, when you sit down, you order a dish, you expect a big portion of it to be meat. It's just it seems to be what's commonly expected. We do set menus, and we try to balance those out with meat and vegetables and legumes and everything else. But also, if you're eating a large volume of food, there's only so much meat you can consume. You become quite full, and you don't feel good. We want people to leave the restaurant feeling great and balanced and fresh, and so we just try to design each course where there's a little bit of everything, and place most of the focus on the way that the experience of that course, rather than on how much protein's in it. It's bloody expensive too.
Yeah.
Produce a menu around meat is expensive, and then there's so many grey areas. Where's the meat from? How was it farmed? Who was the farmer? Where are the profits going? Does it tick all the boxes? So for us, it's about focusing on what we can control, and we've got better relationship with our growers, as in fruit and vegetable growers. Generally, that they're Victorian, most of the stuff that we deal with, so we know where they're coming from. We know how they're grown. And when it comes to meat and fish, you're guided by the information from your suppliers. And we don't get the Australian symbol on our stuff like you guys do at the supermarket. I mean, we just deal with whatever they tell us. So it's about building relationships, which is very laborious.
The idea of diet and identity, Norman, I mean, has it become an industry in itself?
I think so. It seems to be so. Although I think that you can be too dismissive of this. So, I mean, I asked people to put up their hands if they're on a gluten-free diet. So I did this at the Sydney Writers' Festival last year, 800 people, 30% of people put up their hands. And the true rate of gluten sensitivity is about 2 or 3% in the community. So, but are these people idiots or silly or neurotic or what have you? They're clearly getting some benefit from that, which may not be the gluten reduction, but it may be other things that happen in their diet. And it may be related to the microbiome. So it's not a silly thing. 30% of people can't be wrong, but they're probably not getting the benefit. The benefit they're getting may not be from the gluten that's not in their diet, but other stuff that's happening. Because what I think people don't realize is that you trade in your diet. And so there are trade-offs, and sometimes they're conscious trade-offs, and sometimes they're unconscious. So doctors made huge mistakes, a little bit from the Ansel Keys work, but they made huge mistakes early on, and they said, look, what you've got to be on is a low-fat diet. So fat is poison, and you've got to be on a low-fat diet. And one of the problems we have now with this whole saturated fat story, where people say, oh, you've got to drink bulletproof coffee, green coffee beans, and stir butter into it and coconut oil, and that's a really good thing to do because saturated fat is fine for you. Don't worry about it anymore. Well, it's not true. The saturated fat is still not good for you. It's perhaps not quite as bad for you as people thought. But what happened was, when people went on a low-fat diet, they were not discriminating between fats, and they traded it off. And the studies show that if you traded off low-fat for carbs, you didn't get much of a coronary benefit. So you said, oh, well, I'm a low-fat diet, I can have a pile of rice or a pile of pasta, just pile it on, I'm feeling hungry, and you trade it off. Whereas if what people did was trade their fats, their saturated fat, for mono, like extra virgin olive oil, they did get a coronary benefit, because carbs can be not good for your heart. And so these trade-offs really count.
But some are good for the microbiome, so I think we need to differentiate from the different types of carbs.
Sure, but it's overdoing it as well, and it was often simple carbs. So coming back to the gluten thing is, nobody's really researched this, but I suspect what's happening is when you go on a low gluten diet, there's probably other things that you're unconsciously eating to compensate for it, or that is in the carbs or the wheat that you're eating that may have another beneficial effect, because obviously people feel better. And they're not doing themselves any harm, or I'm not aware of any harm there. But I think that we do trade off, and we don't understand the meaning of the trade-off, and we do these massive experiments in diet, massive population-wide experiments with no science.
Give us an example, what do you mean?
Well, there's the paleo diet. Everybody goes out and recommends the paleo diet. The low-fat diet was a massive experiment with very little evidence attached to it. There was one just at the back. Oh, yes, you shouldn't give your baby solids until they're 6 months, and you should be really careful with peanuts and eggs and milk. That has created, and it's Melbourne research has partly found that out, that has almost certainly created the peanut allergy epidemic that we've got now. Because fascinating studies where Israeli Jewish kids compared to British Jewish kids, same genetic stock, Ashkenazi Jewish, Israeli kids get peanut allergy at a much lower rate than British Jewish kids, same genetic stock. It's nothing to do with being Jewish, it's just complaining like for like. Israeli kids get peanuts in the first 3 or 4 months of life, in Bamba and so on. Middle Eastern kids get that too. So you get exposed to these allergens. So we're doing these massive experiments in diet with no evidence. And that's why when Antigone says, the paleo diet, when people say, oh, the paleo diet has got 60,000 years of experience, well, give me a rest. The life expectancy in the Stone Age was 28. So you want to eat a diet with a 28-year lifespan? And of course, depending on where you were a hunter-gatherer, your diet would be entirely different. So if you were in a tropical region, you'd have been eating lots of fruit and vegetables. And if you were in a desert region, you probably were eating a lot of protein with a lot of fat, like Australian Aboriginal people. But even Australian Indigenous people would have eaten different diets as well. There's no one hunter-gatherer. In the same way, there's no one Mediterranean diet. There's a lot of people that live around the Mediterranean. The Cretan diet is the one that's the poster child, but if you live in Morocco,
Or Malta.
Yeah, in Malta, you eat sand and stone. Occasional rabbit and pigeon.
But there is a common theme, though, isn't there? I mean, it's a semi-vegetarian diet across all these countries. So, I mean, that's a question I often get from my patients. I'll say, well, if I follow a semi-vegetarian diet, is that good enough, or do I need to go to the next step, and does it have to be Mediterranean? And my answer to that is, I usually say to them, well, if you can throw in some olives and some extra virgin olive oil and maybe some dark green leafy vegetables and some extra onions and garlic and some legumes, you'll be doing really well. So
Bring it back to the Mediterranean
So I
diet.
do actually, I do bring it back to that.
I guess the other important thing about grains, and even in industrial societies, we started to farm grains, over 10,000 years ago. And the obesity epidemic and all of our chronic disease epidemics are 5-6 decades long. So, that's I guess a comment against these extreme, paleo diets. We can't have grains, we can't have legumes. There's evidence going back thousands of years that we've been consuming all these foods.
So it's
The ancient Greeks were
The ancient
consuming
Greeks,
legumes
yeah.
at
The
6,000
the
BC.
Mediterranean tribe.
So in a way, you say it's only 60 years old or so, but we're trying to retrofit a diet for the fact that our lifestyle no longer allows us to
Yes.
to eat what we used to, because we've changed so dramatically the way we function and move in the world and how much energy we burn and all those sorts of things.
Well, we don't burn energy to obtain our food. So hunter-gatherers obviously could eat, and they do. And when they catch animals, they will eat all the fat from the animal. It's a wild animal, so it won't have as much saturated fat as a domestically bred one. But we don't do anywhere near as much energy. We don't expend as much energy.
Fascinating study of the Amish in northeastern United States, where a huge amount of saturated fat, but they're burning, 9,000-10,000 calories a day because they
They're
don't
building their own
take
houses.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's fascinating, because I
But
want
helped by Harrison Ford.
Yeah, of course. Forgot about that. The importance of, though, and Shane, this is very much in your domain, the ritual of preparing a meal, and that as an experience, not only for good physical health, but good mental health, the ritual of a meal itself in terms of the communal experience and what that does for people's well-being. And
Definitely. I mean, for a sense of community, I mean, just from my own experiences, apart from the things that I've observed through travel or through my family, I remember with my grandparents, growing things, preserving things, and the ritual of it was quite, it was confronting, slaughtering animals, preparing them, cooking them, and then sharing them as a family. I mean, mental health, happiness. It was the one thing that I draw back to the decision I made to become a chef. Everybody looks for happiness. I mean, when I was 14 and made a decision that I wanted to pursue cooking, the only thing that I can think about it was because it was that pursuit of happiness. I mean, I wanted to be drawn back to memories that made me happy. And my happiest times were with my grandparents and my family, and not when I was at school being expelled. So I automatically went towards a family, and I do that with my daughter now. I mean, we get up every Saturday morning. We get up early before my wife gets up. We go to the market. We walk through the stalls. We talk about where the food comes from. We don't know what we're going to buy. We bring it home. We cook it together. We spend time together, and it's actually a really decompressing time for me. I mean, I get to spend time with her. We get to pass on stories. We talk, and then we sit down together and we actually appreciate what we've consumed. We don't talk about the nutritional benefit. I mean, she's too young to take that in. She's only 9. But the time that we spend together, I mean, that has, I've battled through my own mental illnesses. I've had ADHD my whole life. I take pills for it every morning, and I see a therapist once a fortnight. But I find the best therapy is when I spend time with my daughter, and we cook together and we spend time together. And I remember the things that my parents passed to me, my grandparents passed to me, and then passing it on to her. And that's probably the best part of, I suppose, community and food, is that it nullifies any other issues that we're having, and it's just even, and it's about the food and it's about the experience. So.
And as part of the Mediterranean diet experience, the preparation and the experience of food, the cuisine,
Yes.
as a key component which can't be measured in nutrients but can be in experience.
Definitely. I mean, all I can say is that with our elderly Greek migrants that we studied in the 1990s, we found that they were returning to a more traditional Greek diet in old age. and that seemed to give them that mortality advantage. So it was a comforting diet for them to follow in old age. It was sentimental, but it was actually helping them live longer.
So I mean, again, I'm happy to be contradicted by Catherine or Tina, but I think there is a nutritional advantage to some of the things that Shane's talking about, and it is measurable, and it's about speed. So we tend, for convenience, and also, the cooking style of the Australian diet is high temperature. It's got to be quick. You throw the lamb in the oven, it's 200 degrees, and it's got to be, and it comes out burnt or very brown, or the barbecue.
Yes.
And research here in Melbourne has shown that when you get this caramelization, this brown colour on food, it's got substances in it called advanced glycation end products, AGEs. Working on the Baker Institute, maybe you're doing it at La Trobe as well. And those are pro-oxidants. You've heard of free radicals, which help to age your tissues and make heart disease happen and so on, oxidation. And many people wrongly take antioxidant pills thinking it's going to reverse that. It doesn't. Things like the Mediterranean diet with complex antioxidants do. That's when Catherine was starting off talking about inflammation. But these are pro-oxidants, which actually speed up aging and damage to your tissues. And one of the elements, particularly of the Cretan diet, is slow cooking.
It is, yes.
You have a 10-hour lamb. And so things come out with low concentrations of these AGEs.
We call it moist cooking, so where most foods are cooked in like a casserole environment or in a soup, so you don't get ages produced in that environment.
And we actually designed 2 diets where we had the same ingredients, and we used high temperature dry cooking at one end and slow cooking moist environment at the other end, so more casseroles versus grills and fries. And we got a 10 to 100-fold difference in age content in the meals. And we did a small study with young people who are healthy, but these ages do absorb into your bloodstream. And if you have diabetes, they complicate diabetes even further. So it is a very important, that slow cooking is important to reduce the build-up of these
hard to do in a
chemicals.
restaurant.
Yeah, Shane.
Oh, really? Our signature dish is 12-hour roasted lamb.
Hey.
And we move, in the summer, we move a ton a week.
Have a break now for it.
We sell a hell of a lot. That's why I look so good. Now, that would be something I could sell to customers. It's about look younger, not live longer. But no, to be honest, from a restaurant perspective, especially from the cuisine that we do, it's the best fit. I mean, the hardest thing in a restaurant is a la minute, cooking to order. When food's been cooked for 12 hours, it's heat and serve. So it's much more cost effective. You get a lot more consistency. You get a better product. You don't have to worry if it's medium rare, well done. It's just cooked. So, if it's been, to be honest, from a secret to our business has been off the back of that lamb. I mean, Australia's made its money off the back of the sheep, and so have we. I mean, it's what we do. It's become the best product we have. When we do catering for big numbers, it's always slow cooked meats. We don't want to be stuck at a function for 1,000 people for Mercedes-Benz saying we're going to do a medium rare piece of beef and it comes out blue or well done. We look like fools, so you better go in and you do a tagine of something. It's braised, it's got some pulses in there, it's got some vegetables in there, it tastes really good, you can control it and serve it. So, no, it's good for us. It works well.
Adding herbs and spices will also reduce the ages. So is that what you do?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I rub my body in it every morning. It's like Nefertiti at my house. We use an excessive amount of spice, and I think the beauty of Middle Eastern food, especially, is it's singular spicing. I mean, we use spice to unlock a singular flavour, as opposed to some other cuisines where spices are blended to mask flavour. With the food that we do, we really try to focus on an onion, and we'll say, okay, what's the best for us to get onion flavour for this dish? It may be cumin or maybe fenugreek. So we try to balance the flavours with the specific vegetable or legume that we're using.
Is that the great joy of what you do, unlocking those flavours, like trying to?
I love cooking. I mean, I've loved cooking forever. I mean, I've been cooking professionally since I was 15. Yeah. So I really enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy that I don't get to cook as much as I'd like to. But I create all the dishes with the chefs. I mean, we sit down yesterday for 4 hours discussing 3 dishes. I mean, so I'm looking forward to next week when we go in. Now we've put the master plan out. They'll prepare them. I'll come in. We'll taste them. We'll adjust a little bit further, and then we'll go reset again, and then we'll put them on the menu. So it takes a while.
And we'll all be there to try them.
Hopefully.
So which of these spices that that
So
do this?
the ones that are very high in antioxidants, so one's high in rosmarinic acid, which is your rosemary and oregano.
Oregano in particular.
Also cinnamon. They're very high in the polyphenols, which are
They're just flogging
antioxidant.
Greek and Cretan stuff. I mean,
Well, the other one that's been mentioned a lot in recent times is turmeric.
Yes.
Yes.
So what do we know of its properties and what it's supposed to...
It's very good for the brain.
Yeah.
It actually promotes a neurotrophin, which is a chemical in the brain that promotes cells to grow, brain cells to grow, especially in the hippocampus. And there have been 4 clinical trials on turmeric showing that it's good for the brain. And it's partly also because of its anti-inflammatory properties. So inflammation is bad for the brain. So it's working.
So I should have some turmeric sandwiches for lunch.
And I think there's some evidence with cumin as well. Curcumin, the chemical in cumin.
So curcumin is in turmeric.
Oh, right.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yes, that's the active
Shows
principle
you
in
what I
turmeric.
know, yeah.
Curcumin is a culinary term.
Yeah.
You're talking about the benefits there of slow cooking and the scientific benefits there and the way that the preparation of the food we can diminish its nutritional value by cooking it quickly. But slow cooking, this is where I wanted to get to the point. Slow cooking is a function of affluence. You've got to have the time to do it. You've got to have the...
I don't agree.
No?
I mean, if you take most older cultures, they all have 24-hour pots. I mean, and it's often related to the Sabbath. So Muslim culture, there's a Persian dish, I can't remember the name of it, but you put it on a Thursday night and you eat it on a Friday, which is the Muslim Sabbath. Ashkenazi Jews have something called cholent, which is a layered pot. It's not very healthy, but it's a layered pot, but it cooks for 24 hours because you're not allowed to cook on the Sabbath. So I think most cultures that are not affluent have those 24-hour slow-cooked pots. So I don't think it is to do... there is an element true of time when you've got 2 working parents, 3 kids and...
access to fresh ingredients. And this has often been the argument, hasn't it, that people are not preparing their own food anymore because they're maybe spending an hour and a half either way in their car getting to and from work. They get home late. They don't have a lot of money to go to we might go to the Vic markets or whatnot and pick up fresh produce. That's not an option. So how do we offer those people a pathway to a diet that might provide the same benefits as the Mediterranean diet, or give them access to and the skills and tools to actually do it themselves?
I think it's about preparation. You have to be prepared, think ahead. You can prepare things on the weekend, and there's no problem with cook freezing a lot of these dishes. Tagines, whether they're casseroles, they do cope very well with being frozen and defrosted during the week. The slow cooking, again, you put something on in the morning and you come back in the afternoon and it's ready. The issue is when you're driving home hungry, you stop off somewhere and you want to pick it up, or you go home and you wait and you dial and it could be 45 minutes, an hour. You could have cooked a meal in an hour, but we're happy to wait.
Yeah, no, it's definitely about preparation. I mean, so we prepare everything else. We get ready for the weekend. We get ready for going to work. We sort out our stuff for our kids. But if you plan your meals properly throughout the week, not every component has to be cooked on that day. I mean, I look at dishes that we grew up with, like mjadra. It's lentils and cinnamon and onions. And it's one of the most beautiful dishes, but it keeps for 2 weeks. I mean, it doesn't turn. I mean, the thing just doesn't turn. It's great. But it's, as a base, as a filler, it's amazing. So, you can make one a week and you can then add to it again. I think being smarter with recipes that you can adapt. So if you start with that as a base, you can always add proteins and stuff if you want to them. And then the other bits and pieces of a proper stocked pantry can be whipped up quite quickly. I know I'm a cook, but my wife's always amazed with how quick we can knock something up. But it's just about stocking the pantry right and being prepared and, shopping for the week and making sure it's good. So, I'm pretty time poor. I kicked on at 6 this morning. After we finish here, I've still got 2 events I have to go to. And I haven't had a chance to eat. But when I go home, I know that I've got some stuff stashed away. I've got stuff in the freezer. I've got base stocks made. I've got... and I know it sounds a bit chefy and but it's a necessity. It's become a part of, even for Maha, for my wife. She's not a great cook, and she says that she doesn't enjoy cooking. But she wants to feed our kids a really balanced diet. So I try to help as much as I can about making sure the right things are in the pantry, because not everything takes a long time to cook.
No.
You know what I mean?
So it's fascinating that we have got to a point where we know now the med diet is successful. Can it be translated, the elements of it, to other diets or other, with other culture, within other cultures, or the principles of it that might be able to be, used in different settings with different people?
I think it can, because the majority of the research on the Mediterranean diet was actually done on the pattern, not actually on the cuisine. And there was a paper published just 2 years ago by Professor Sophie from the University of Florence in Italy, and he reviewed all the studies ever done on the Mediterranean diet, and it was on 4 million people, so a huge number of people, and they weren't all from Mediterranean countries. Some of them were from non-Mediterranean parts of the world. And they applied our score basically to the 4 million people, and they weren't told to eat Mediterranean food. It was a cross-section. Most of them were cross-sectional studies, and they asked them basically to describe what they normally eat, and then if they had a high score, Mediterranean dietary pattern score, they were deemed as following a more Mediterranean dietary pattern, and then that was went on to be shown that it was offering them an advantage in health in terms of heart disease and cancer. So
if you think of the Vietnamese diet, for example, it looks different, it tastes different, so different spices in it.
The principles.
That's right. The 9 elements are still there. You're not eating much red meat. There's a lot of vegetables.
That's it.
Vegetables dominate. Complex carbohydrates. Just looks different.
So the message is a plant-based diet, basically. Not to be afraid to eat legumes. I know if you're following a paleo diet, that legumes are banned because of the lectins and some other things that are in legumes. But lectins are not a problem. If you cook legumes, they are not a problem. So legumes need to feature in the diet at least once or twice a week, and that's even based on the score that we developed. That's how much you need to be eating legumes, and it's in place of meat, not in addition to the meat. So it's not a side dish, it is the main event.
So we're talking about beans and
Lentil dish that's in the fridge.
Lentil soup, beans soup,
Peas.
fasolada, which is the national dish of Greece. So the national dish of Greece is a plant-based food.
I thought that had Turkish origins. Oh, no, sorry.
No, not fasolada, no.
Oh.
Before we get into that debate, I guess I was just going to add that a lot of the studies that we're doing now, we're translating the Mediterranean diet to our multi-ethnic population here in Australia. So we use these principles and we apply them to different cuisines. So we don't say to an individual who's just had a heart attack, well, you're from North Asia, therefore you've got to follow a Mediterranean diet. But we work with the different ingredients, and legumes are a classic example, and Antigone's done a lot of work in this area, because they translate to all of the healthy, long-living cultures, whether it be tofu, whether it be dal or fasolada. So legume would be one of the key ingredients that translates across multiple healthy eating patterns around the world.
would my can of baked beans in the morning count?
Yeah, baked beans.
Yes, it does. It counts.
All that sugar.
Well, and there's tomato. There's tomato.
Well, we shouldn't be Pollyannish about this and sort of romantic. There are some traditional diets that are pretty unhealthy, and the Indian diet is one of them.
Yeah.
So they do have a lot of legumes and a lot of, and it's not uniform. The South Indian diet is different from the North Indian diet and so on. But there are parts of India with some of the highest rates of coronary heart disease in the world, and they're eating a traditional Indian diet.
Okay.
So it's ghee, that's right. And it's probably complicated by the motor car and the motorbike and so on, and not getting enough exercise.
But what's happened in India, though, is their carbohydrate intake has changed dramatically, and their simple sugar intake has gone up a lot.
Yes.
So although they might be using ghee, they are having, there's deep fried carbohydrate foods that are preferred. So a lot of their festive foods, and that tends to be the bad taste of any good cuisine, that we focus only on festive foods instead of the traditional basic diet. So I think elements of the Indian diet that are healthy are the spices and the legumes, but the unhealthy components are the carbohydrates, particularly the simple sugars.
All right, we could continue talking about this up here, but we do want to throw the floor open to you to ask some questions of our panellists. I think we have a couple of copies of Catherine's book to give away, the Mediterranean Diet Cookbook, to the first two brave people who are going to ask a question. So if you want a copy of Catherine's book, we've got... There they go. Hands are in there. Shane wants one too. So we've got a couple of microphones out there. So I will come down here to this gentleman who's quickly shot his arm in the air, and he's got a question to start things off.
Thank you. I'm very excited about the cookbook, but I do have a burning question as well. What are the implications of the process of cooking on a lot of these foods that you're talking about? I guess, I don't know how fatty it is, but you see a lot of raw recipes popping up now, and a sort of a push for more eating of raw food, and that cooking damages the nutrition of food and all that kind of stuff. What are your kind of thoughts on that and how to balance that?
Who wants to take that?
On
I'm happy to start with that.
Go on,
Yeah.
Delia.
So, excessive cooking of food does destroy a number of different nutrients that are sensitive to heat. So, vitamin C and other antioxidants like that will be reduced considerably, and also polyphenols, which are these anti-inflammatory components. So, overcooking is not a good idea, and raw for a lot of ingredients, particularly plant foods, are fine. But we know from studies that we've done here in Australia that a tomato, for argument's sake, which is very rich in an antioxidant called lycopene, will have 2, 3, 10-fold more lycopene absorbed into your body if you chop it, you cook it, and you eat it with olive oil. So I think cooking is important because it maximises the uptake of certain nutrients. There's nothing wrong with some raw foods, though. You can't eat everything raw.
So in a way, what you're saying is that the blanket idea or the sort of like ambit claim that raw food is necessarily better for you is just not true.
I mean, I'll add here as a clinical dietitian, because I work in private practice as well as being an academic. If I see patients with gut problems like inflamed bowel, I do not recommend raw food in that situation. They need to eat everything cooked, because when the bowel's inflamed, it's not doing its job properly, it's not producing the digestive enzymes, there's inflammation. You don't want to aggravate that inflammation with lots of raw, crunchy food. It's just going to make their bowel a lot worse. So I tend to put them on a soft diet for a few weeks until their kind of bowel starts to recover. So in that situation, raw food is definitely not helpful.
And
Yeah.
would you suggest that it's the way that it's cooked? Also, say like boiling a vegetable versus steaming a vegetable? You know?
Steaming is better. It's better because you're retaining a lot more nutrients. And you can steam them until they're quite soft. I mean, you know, so if you need to be on a soft diet because of bowel problems, you can do it with steamed food. Yeah.
Thank you.
This the question down here.
I'd be interested in that because I did that.
So, okay, we might need to turn that microphone on, but the question was, what's the opinion on one of the current fad diets, the 5-2 diet? Which, Shane, you've done it, so...
And I don't know what,
tell us what you did.
I did that for a couple of months and I lost 12 kilos. So for a weight loss perspective, it was great.
So it was 5.
But I don't know what effect it had on me.
So what's the diet? So it's 2 days of fasting in 7, is it?
Yeah, I'm not the probably
So
person.
2 days a week, you take 500 calories.
Yeah,
And the rest of the week, in theory, you don't really worry about what you eat. And so there turns out to be more and more evidence that stressing your body metabolically is actually quite a good thing to do. It seems to make your insulin system work better. If you've got cancer, it probably reduces, there's some evidence in women with breast cancer, it reduces the insulin-like growth factor that seems to stimulate cancer growth. Some of this is theoretical. And it's like interval training. You know, interval training stresses your body a bit more than just regular moderate exercise, and you can get away with less time during the week with your interval training. It's all about this metabolic stress. And unlike the paleo diet, where it's very idiosyncratic in what paleo diet, the one thing that you can say about the hunter-gatherer lifestyle was that probably food was not a regular thing. You didn't know when it was coming, and you probably did have periods where you didn't have enough food. But it very much depends on that environment. You could be collecting grasses all the time and eating every day, so it's not entirely clear, but we probably are a bit more geared to periods of low-calorie intake. And the evidence is that it doesn't seem to do any harm. It seems to do some good. Any diet will help you lose weight. And it really is what you depend on. The problem is it can be very hard to stick to those 500 calories in those days, and you certainly don't want to spread it beyond those days and turn it into an eating disorder. So, for example, some people say, well, what happens if I eat 750 calories on my day off? And it probably relies on the fact that you go into a calorie deficit on your low-calorie days, which help you trade off for the calories you might eat on your days off or on, whatever you know what I mean, when you're eating the full diet. But if you go up to, if you loosen that, then you're not going to have as many calories to trade. And because you're eating a normal diet on your days off the fasting, you're probably getting reasonable nutrition. So there is something to it, but is it sustainable? I can't do it on a sustainable
Well, Shane, how
basis.
did you find it?
No, it's very, very hard. I mean, I suppose that I did that in conjunction with, I really lifted my training and physical training and everything else. So I can't put it solely to the diet. But it was really hard. I mean, mentally, it was very hard to focus. I mean, and I didn't just eat normally on the other days. I really tried to eat you know, I don't calorie count, but I mean, I wasn't eating huge plates of food. I was really focused on those 3 months to try to eat better. So it was probably a combination of a few things, but it was very, like I work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. You know, when you get to about hour 10, I mean, it's quite hard to focus on a fast day.
Especially when you're around all that great food too.
No, I mean, you just switch off and you get jittery and you feel, your body feels it.
Can I just ask, have you tried that? Have you had an experience with the 5-2 diet?
I attempted it, but I didn't last.
Yeah.
Oh, it's hard work.
Yeah.
But
I just hear that there's evidence that it's good for you.
there is evidence. I had a look at the evidence recently because I had to give a lecture on it. And there is a systematic review of 40 studies on the 5-2 diet. And what they found was that it was equivalent to daily calorie restriction. So if you're reducing your calories, say, to 1,200 calories versus the 5-2 diet, you lose the same amount of weight. Now, that's restricting your calories every day over the week. I think 5-2 is a better option because you're not restricting on 5 days. You can basically eat whatever you like. So I prescribe it a lot to my patients and I get amazing results with my patients and they don't struggle with it at all because they really look forward to the 5 days. Basically.
As long as they don't overdo it on those 5 days.
No, they tend not to. If anything, they're not as hungry the next day, which is quite an interesting observation that's coming up a lot.
You've really got to question some of the diets which radically alter your dietary pattern, right, in terms of what you eat in terms of nutrients. So the Atkins diet, the Atkins style diet, which is also like the paleo diet, high protein, very high fat, very low carb. And they say, well, it doesn't do you much harm in terms of coronary heart disease. Well, it's probably never been studied long enough, but there is a fair bit of evidence that if you really stick to it, it doesn't do much harm. But God help you if you actually slip on the Atkins diet or a paleo diet and you start eating carbs, because that's where the high fat will really start to damage you. So you're on a bit of a knife edge with some of these diets because they're so abnormal. And but you can go on the grape diet, the Israeli commando diet. Any of these diets will lose weight, but they're not all healthy and not all sustainable.
The advantage with the 5-2 appears to be primarily with people who have insulin resistance. That's what the research has shown, that if you have a family history of diabetes or you've got pre-diabetes, the 5-2 diet is really good for those type of people, but not for everybody.
I've got a question from this gentleman, because I've been all down the front so far.
It's also
I think we're recording, so we need to hear you.
Yeah, if you can use the
So
microphone.
as a follow-on from the 5-2 diet, I think another Mosley diet is the 8-week get back into shape diet or whatever, where you have...
Or I've got a wedding and I've got to fit into my dinner suit again
whatever,
diet,
yep.
right?
So one of those, for those of us who could do with a kickstart, so to speak,
Yes.
if I remember it right, that you have, I think, 800 calories for 8 weeks, and that sort of gets you in a homeostatic state,
Every day.
and then you can sort of eat properly and you're fine. This is for weight loss and for people who are pre-diabetic or borderline diabetic.
Antigone,
Yes.
are you aware of this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So that diet is basically like your OptiFast. If you go on OptiFast, it's 800 calories on OptiFast, 600 to 800 calories. It's the same type of concept. So it's not really that new as a diet, because they are recommending meal replacements on that diet, on the 800 calorie.
It's interesting, we've sort of like drifted into this area about very specific diets and weight loss, and I think it gets away from the things we were talking about a little earlier on, which was about cuisine, ritual, shared experience, and the holistic experience of food. And I think if we, and I'm not having a go at anyone who's taking those challenges on, because obviously it meets a certain need, but we are losing something by doing that, aren't we?
Well, food is emotive, and we need to enjoy
very,
it.
Yeah.
And we know from all of the studies around weight loss that, as Norman said earlier, all diets work because they impact our energy balance. Less energy in, more energy out, you're going to lose weight, whatever you do, even if it's a crap diet. But what is sustainable is important, and what's sustainable is what you like, what you enjoy. You have to really enjoy the food you eat to be able to go beyond the 4 weeks, the 8 weeks, the 6 months, the 12 months. Yeah. And I guess back to a Mediterranean style diet, because it's a high-fat diet, a healthy high-fat diet, it's palatable, and you're satiated. You get that enjoyment. It's not, low-fat diets are hard to stick to, and you do become more irritable, particularly calorie restricted. So that emotional, negative emotion that you get with being on a diet, you can't live with that for a long time.
You're losing weight, but it's hard work. I think this lady down here has been with her hand. We'll just get a microphone to you so everyone can hear your question down here.
Hi, I'm actually going to try and fit in a comment and a question, but they're really two questions. I think one's going to become a question. And the first part was, it was triggered by something you said, Norman, and when you mentioned about allergies and the 6 months, putting a baby onto solids at 6 months or not. I work in a new arrivals school, have done since 2009, and our clientele are all from other countries. We don't have a nut policy. To my knowledge, we don't have allergies. We have things like asthma reported. We don't have any reported allergies to nuts. It intrigues my colleagues and I. I don't know what your experience has been in your industries, but new colleagues come in and they say, oh, so what's your policy? And we say, well, the kids bring whatever lunch they like. Some of them bring a hot lunch, some of them bring a sandwich. But we haven't come across allergies as a rule, so that really intrigues me. So if you've got an answer to that. The second question, or the main question, I guess, is what's the current momentum? I'm interested in the current momentum around the sugar tax.
That's a really interesting one. So let's start, Norman, with, because it is intriguing, your study with the Israeli kids with Jewish heritage.
Well, they're now moving towards, the Children's Hospital here in Melbourne. The allergy group there are, they're actively trying to change the recommendations so that you just get less hung up about this stuff and you can introduce these allergens earlier and really not worry about it so much. It's a little bit of a worry if there's already a lot of real allergies in the family and you're going to bring peanuts in and you've got peanut allergy kids, and what do you do about the next generation and the kids that follow? And it was probably not true of babies that are born. It's rare, but some babies are born with a lot of allergies from day one. They've got a lot of eczema, a lot of wheezing and snuffles and so on and so forth. But for the average kid, we should really be relaxing a lot about what we give them and going back to traditional stuff. Halva, bamba, whatever the name was of these mixed dishes that kids get, and they get in and they mess around with it. We get worried about having pets because they might get allergy. The more pets you have, the less allergic you're going to be in the first year of life. That's when your immune system gets trained.
Could it be that these children are coming from countries where there's not very heavy antibiotic use, which affects the microbiome of the mother?
Well, actually, they're coming from countries where there actually is a lot of antibiotic use, particularly in animals. And they have a huge antibiotic resistance problems. I'm not sure that's necessarily the reason. Quite poor countries have a lot of antibiotic problems.
Okay.
The sugar tax is the other part of the question, and whether that is part of the equation going forward, or and if so, what does it say about our ability to make good choices for ourselves if we've got to have a war on sugar?
That's really tricky, and it has worked in some countries, and we've seen the data.
So where?
Well, in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess the key is about getting a balance. There's a perception that healthy foods are expensive, and that's more than a perception, I guess, for some foods. What we know about a Mediterranean-style diet is that it's not expensive. We've actually compared it and published data showing that a standard diet that we would eat is about $25 a week more expensive than a Mediterranean-style diet. Again, it's about the plant-to-animal food ratio. Going back to your point, meat is expensive. Plant foods, plant proteins are less expensive. So I think with the sugar tax, it's trying to drive consumption away from soft drinks and those sorts of easily accessible snack foods. We know in Australia 35% of the calories that we eat are discretionary foods that are high in fat, high in sugar, and don't add any nutritional value to our diet. Wasted calories. So how do we best attack the discretionary foods? Education is an important thing. Embedding diets or cultural habits where you have snacks, but they must add value, like a nut or a yogurt or a fruit. So I favour education, but taxes...
So I disagree. I mean, there's not a shred of evidence, in my view, from looking at the evidence, that education makes any difference at all. One of the reasons why you could go to the alcohol industry and they will give you any amount of money you want to educate people about the ill effects of alcohol. Why do they do that? Because they know it doesn't work. Information does not change behavior. Why do we have world's lowest smoking rates when there would have not been an Australian, kind of since the mid-50s who didn't know that smoking was bad for you, yet we had very high smoking rates. What changed that? Well, we realized that if you actually are not smoking by the age of 19, you're unlikely ever to smoke. And what's the most important influence on you as a child? It's advertising, it's role models, and it's price. So we priced cigarettes very highly, not to discourage the age groups in this room, but to discourage a 14-year-old from buying it because they're very price sensitive. What gets the alcohol industry up in arms? Suggesting that you actually price alcohol according to the amount of alcohol in drinks. That will get war with the alcohol industry. Why? Because they know it will work in terms of reducing that. So you've got to do passive things that do that. So I mean, you were talking about access to cheap fruit and vegetables. So I did Biggest Loser a few years, and we did one in rural Victoria, where Coles and Woolies were meeting the market, but once Biggest Loser came into town and people changed their behaviour, they had a shortage of fruit and vegetables. They actually had to change their product pattern in the large supermarket chains because the market changed. So you can actually provide these things. So price does seem to work with sugar, with empty calories. Whether it does with fat or not is another matter, and that's more complicated. But there is evidence, but it's complicated. You've got to know what the right percentage is, what you do with that tax. Do you trade it off so that the diet drink becomes much cheaper? So it's not just that the sugar drink's 20% more expensive, but the diet drink actually becomes cheaper. So the supermarket doesn't lose out because they still sell a drink, but they're selling a healthier pattern. And how you actually modulate that and change that, that's not entirely clear, but there are strong signals that a sugar tax of some kind will work. And we should probably think about it, because the problem is not the people in this room. The problem is not the people who live in Toorak, Armadale or Glen Iris. The problem is in people who have not had the luck to have a long education, who are poorer and have to work multiple jobs and have to buy what they get and buy convenience food. We have to make the right thing, the easy and affordable thing to do, and that means government intervention and regulation, and it's not about the nanny state, because the global epidemic in obesity, as Catherine said right at the beginning, is a relatively recent phenomenon. And it's not just about lack of exercise, it's about the global food industry, empty calories, things becoming, and empty calories or high calorie, low value foods becoming so widely available and more affordable than good things. And so we've allowed the market to operate, and the market has failed. And whenever a market has failed, there's a role for government to intervene.
That's going to bet the food industry, and we will take a question though, that is a massive fight to have, isn't it? I mean, the power of big food to try to shift.
Because tobacco is an easy one, it's bad.
Yes.
And everything else is great shades of grey, that's the problem.
So the hand shot up over there. You might want to grab a mic. We need a microphone. We are recording tonight, sir, so that you can hear your question.
Okay, you spoke of empty calories, high sugary foods. Now for children, for example, most kids today, they have a lot of sugary foods, empty calories. How would that affect their mindset, their brain? Some kids might even suffer some sort of depression these days. Children, I've never heard of children in my time suffering depression or anxiety as I was growing up. I come from a Mediterranean background as well, which I do have a lot of Mediterranean type food, but I've never sort of experienced in my early days children having anxiety, depression and all that sort of thing.
It's a great question in the basis that we talked about how a good diet can improve your mental health, and the Mediterranean diet can do that. What does a poor diet do for that? And in this gentleman's question in relation to kids with processed diets?
Well, Catherine can answer that too, but we know that poor diets are linked to depression because, again, it's to do with the flora in the bowel. as well as inflammatory markers in the blood, and so on can inflame the brain. So there have been 20 clinical trials now showing that a healthy diet can reduce the risk of developing depression. So these kids are just, their diet's just too high in, sugar-dense, fat-dense, nutrient-poor foods, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, I concur. A colleague of mine, Felice Jacker, has published data on children and women, and the association between a poor Western-style diet and depression was very obvious. A paper we published earlier this year, we called it the SMILE study, showed a 30% regression or remission of depression in people on a Mediterranean-style diet versus standard care. And some of the factors that were important, obviously the nutrients or the combination of foods that they were eating were impacting the brain some way, but also the fact that they were looking after themselves and cooking. So I think with children, the other message is cooking at home, teaching children about sources of foods and that things actually grow in the garden and you have to prepare them and cook them. They don't come out of packets.
I mean, we're very focused on diet, but there are other variables that affect brain health, and that is poor sleep would have to be a number one. Stress can also affect brain health, and certain nutritional deficiencies can affect brain health, like vitamin D deficiency, zinc deficiency. So, if you're not eating well, I mean, it's apart from the nutritional deficiencies, there are these other things too that you need to consider. Sleep is being very important.
And there's, so you've got that. You've also got screen time.
Oh, screen time, yes, of course.
In young babies. So, for example, you've got a lot of videos on the market, to stimulate your baby's brain. If they research done at the University of Washington in Seattle, shown that if you actually show a baby rapidly intercut images, so it doesn't actually, so it could be often a music video is often very rapidly intercut, it actually changes the developing brain, and they seem to have a higher incidence of ADHD and developmental problems later. So it's they're watching screen time. And interestingly, it's probably just intuitive that Play School and those other high quality children's programs are slow. They're not fast. And they probably just did that intuitively, but in fact it's the right thing to do. So it's not screen time, it's actually what they're watching on the screen and how it's made can change a baby's brain as well.
We'll go to the back of the room for a question.
I have two questions. My first one pertains to carbohydrates. You spoke about the importance of not focusing on one nutrient specifically. However, you also noted that a high carbohydrate diet is not good for you. When you look at some people who are trying to maintain a low carb diet, they're taking out fruits, which we recognise have multiple health and well-being benefits. How do you see the balance of how you moderate your carbohydrates but still eat the things that are good for you? My second question is quite different. We've spoken about the long travel times that some people experience today, and that's particularly an issue in the growth corridors of Melbourne, where people are commuting an hour and a half each way and are experiencing financial stress and report poor access to fresh fruit and vegetables. What solutions do you propose for areas like that, where they may also have lower education completion rates in some instances?
Yeah, so it's two different questions, but important ones. So
the first one was about carbohydrate.
yeah, the balance.
How do you manage the carb? So with carbohydrates, it's about picking the slow carbs. I think that's probably the best way to describe the carbs. So carbohydrates that are high in fibre are really important to keep in the diet, because these are important food for the bacteria in the gut, for the good bacteria. So if you cut out all the carbs from your diet, you're essentially starving the bacteria in your bowel. So what are the slow carbs? So things like your whole grains, your rolled oats, your whole grain bread, your legumes, fruits and veggies. So you don't cut these big major food groups out of your diet. You can reduce your intake if you're concerned about total carbohydrate intake, but I wouldn't recommend you cut them out of your diet completely, like cutting out grains out of your diet. Only, of course, if you've got celiac disease, it's a different question altogether. But Basically, I like to go back to the ancient Greek saying, everything in moderation. I think if you do that, you're essentially okay. You'll be fine if you just have a little bit of everything, and the carbohydrates will sort themselves out, really. So I don't know if that's answered your question. And the other one would be, I would have to say, is resistant starch is an important carbohydrate that is generated when we cook and cool down foods that are high in starch and carbohydrates. So eating a reheated potato has a lot more resistant starch, and the body treats it like fibre. So it's actually not accessible as sugar is. So the starch isn't broken down and converted to sugar. It's fermented by the bacteria in the gut and produces those beneficial short-chain fatty acids. So eating reheated carbs like rice and pasta and potatoes are not as fattening, if that helps you understand what that means, that it's not as accessible as energy if you eat reheated carbohydrates.
Music to Shane's ears. That's
I'm just saying it's like double fried duck fat potatoes. I mean,
Just
you
sort of
cook them the night before, you dry them out, you fry them in duck fat. I'm going to eat a bucket of those, mate.
There's dinner server right there.
Everything in moderation.
With the second question, though, I've just finished, this isn't a plug, but we just finished filming a show called Recipe for Life, which is going to air in January for SBS. And I don't profess to being a health professional. I'm a cook. I've got no expertise in a balanced diet or nutrition. But the show's all about health and well-being and community being the big focus. Mainly dealing with, so we did a case study with some kids out in Tarneet, which is the growth corridor that you're talking about. So Thomas Carr College. Now, on the way from my place to Thomas Carr College, I passed about 15 McDonald's. It was ridiculous. And they started to become more intense as you started moving further out to the west. We went into the school where these kids were in year 11 and 12, and 10, 11 and 12, and went into the school canteen, and I was appalled. I thought that we got rid of all that shit out of school. I mean, it was dim sims, it was a wall of chocolate, it was soft drink, it was all the stuff that you don't want to see. And I honestly thought that was gone, but it wasn't. And we spoke to the guys in the canteen, all that kind of stuff, and what we did is we created our own canteen with some of these kids. We started growing fruit and vegetable at school and spoke to them about, why do they go for these foods at school? And they said, because it's what we eat at home. So, it's generational. I mean, it's pushed into these kids, and that's all they know. So we thought, well, how do we break that? I mean, if the parents are stuck that way and that's what they're going to do because that's they know, well, maybe if the kids try to change it. But I don't know if we were successful. I mean, the kids really wanted it. The show shows that it was a great success, and there was all that MasterChef music at the end of it. And it really was. I mean, like, we set up a canteen and we did it head to head with the other canteen, and all the stuff that we tried to cook and that we did cook that got all the ticks sold like, it was crazy.
It gives you hope that it can.
It gave us hope. It really did give us hope. And we've stayed in touch with some of the core kids from that group, and they say that they're still doing it.
And it's probably changed the parents' behaviour as well.
I hope so. I mean, that's the hope. I mean, that we can start it with the kids, because like I said before, my wife isn't, she's not a great cook. She doesn't like cooking, and she'll go for something that's quicker and easier, and that the kids will shut them up rather than what's better for them. But she's willing to go that extra leg to give the kids a better diet. So it's more out of the hope for them and being a bit more focused on their nutrition. But it's a hard one to break. I mean, I don't know if we were successful at all.
I think it's an excellent example. I still maintain that good habits start in the home. And they need to be maintained in the home. When there are difficulties, you start with policy, and with schools, I would say canteen policy, that we should eradicate soft drinks or these unhealthy foods. And I know that canteens within a school environment or any work environment, any environment, need to be sustainable and make money. But that's about customer demand. So if we create a demand for purchase of healthy foods, then the canteens will survive. But we may need to start with policy when it comes to schools, and certainly a lot of schools are doing that.
We've got time for one more question because we've run the clock down.
Hi, thank you for that. Now, just a couple of things. I do love a Mediterranean diet. I do find that fish is more expensive than meat, so I don't eat as much fish as I'd like to. But part of that also is the thought of a glass of wine as well with dinner and that kind of thing. And I want to sort of understand what is the healthy limit to a glass of wine or two, or where does that fit into the Mediterranean diet?
Don't ask me, I'm a chef. I mean,
That's his profit margin you're talking about. So the thing about alcohol, it used to be thought that from some studies that no alcohol was bad for you, and there was a sweet spot of 1 or 2 drinks a day. It's kind of a J-shaped curve, and then the risk would go up. And what was realized is that those studies were not that well interpreted or studied, and in fact the people who were not drinking anything were actually sicker, and that's why they weren't drinking the alcohol. And so there's a linear relationship. So basically the risk goes up with more alcohol that you drink. And in fact, there's come some recent studies, which I was sort of toying whether to do in the health report and spoil everybody's day, is that in fact the effect on the brain, the damaging effect of the brain on alcohol, really does start at 1 drink a day. And so there's kind of no safe limit. And women is a real issue because you increase the risk of breast cancer the more that you drink. So there's a real problem for women, which men don't suffer, they just simply destroy their brains. So, but the thing here is that, so you just have to accept some things that it's not necessarily good for you to be drinking the alcohol, but it's enjoyable. And we're not about being wowzers here. So 1 drink a day is not really going to do you that much harm, and if you've got risk of heart disease, it may actually do you a bit of good. It's when you're starting to be excessive, or what a lot of people do in high-pressure industries is they're not drinking much during the week, and they load it up for a Friday night, and then they binge. And when they binge, particularly younger people, when they binge, so binging is basically drinking to get a bit drunk, or very drunk. And so that's drinking a lot of alcohol. First of all, that increases your propensity to dependence, because high doses suddenly, and then not there, gives you a sense of desire to drink more. We haven't got time to actually go into that. But also what happens is you're more likely to mix your drugs. So you get a bit drunk on a Friday night, you drink more than you should. It's not necessarily with food, so it's not in an environment that Shane would encourage, which is that you're drinking a moderate amount with your meal, and that's a very different situation from going out and get pissed in the bar.
I'm opening a bar.
Yeah.
Maybe 2, I mean.
But
But you have snacks.
but then you're liable to pop a pill, or take another drug, and they start working together. And then you get this depressant effect lasting through to Monday morning. So it's a complicated story, and there's no safe dose of alcohol, unfortunately.
So as we invite you out for a drink later on, I think we've got to finish there because we have gone past our final whistle here at 8 o'clock. I'd like to thank our panellists. It's been a fantastic discussion tonight. Shane, Catherine, Antigone and Norman. Catherine's book is on sale at the front, isn't it? I think we've got some copies of your cookbook out there. They'll be walking out the door. And our next event here is happening on Thursday, the 24th of August, the latest Bold Thinking series from La Trobe. And this will be fascinating. This is going to be an amazing discussion. It is the 50th anniversary celebration of La Trobe University. There's been a number of events that have gone on. But this particular one, the La Trobe 3, tells a story of La Trobe's rather vigorous and at times controversial political history about 3 La Trobe students who defied authorities both at La Trobe and also in the state of Victoria in the early 70s around the Vietnam War and a number of issues. And they paid a really heavy penalty. In fact, they ended up in Pentridge Prison, and it had long-term ramifications for them. And we're going to have those miscreants here with us on the 24th of August to discuss that, the idea of political activism, the lasting impact on them of their activism at La Trobe, and it's going to be an incredible discussion. If you want to be involved and come along, well, you know where to find us. It'll be 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 24th of August, and I'm really looking forward to hosting that one. Can you once again thank our panellists? And we do have some drinks, do we, Christina, at the front there?
Yeah, thank you. Really good.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, that's a pity. It's good.
Well done, everyone.
You can't get up, right?